mind if I
don't mind. Okay. So this is Crystal. I'm interviewing Sarah. What's your last name?
Tiller?
Okay. This is Sarah Tiller. She's my neighbor. Sarah, where are you from?
I am from Australia.
That's so cool. Why did you decide to come to America?
Well, I came to America with my husband, Emil, who relocated here for his job, and he's a software engineer, as am I.
That's so cool. Do you like it here?
Yes, we like it here a lot. It's different from Australia. There's a lot of things the same, but there's a lot of subtle differences, but overall we're very happy here, and we're very fortunate and lucky to be here.
And we still have a cat.
Yeah. What was the process like coming over here?
Well, the process was pretty straightforward. We initially came through on a visa for my husband's work, and that was an E3 visa. And the way it worked is we went to the department. Now, I get the names of some of these places mixed up, but we had to go to the US Embassy in Australia and interview there, and they asked us some questions. They wanted to know a little bit about us. They wanted to understand why we were coming here. And then it was pretty easy. And well, actually, it turns out my parents, although I was born in Australia, my parents are American citizens, which meant I'm eligible for US citizenship through descent. And I didn't really think too much about it until I tried to get my driver's license. When I went to get my driver's license, they wouldn't give me one because I don't have a social security number, which, it seemed kind of strange to me, but I said, okay, well, what can I do about it? And when I researched it, it turned out the easiest way to get a social security number is to become a citizen. I could also have applied for some different types of visas, but I figured, I'll just get the citizenship, and I did. I had to actually prove that my parents were American citizens, which meant finding their birth certificates and finding their proof that they were born here, which was actually kind of tricky because they're a bit older, and back then the record keeping wasn't as streamlined as it is today. There weren't computers, and there weren't, lots of people looking over the paperwork, checking it. And a funny story is that my grandmother, when she gave birth to my father in Los Angeles about 75 years ago, when she was filling in the form, I guess she misread it and she filled in her name where she was meant to put his name. Now, birth certificates are an official document, and I think that ended up causing my dad some problems throughout his life, but he managed to figure it out. But legally his name is Anna. But anyway, so I took these documents, and then I had to have that conversation with immigration department explaining why my father's name is Anna. But it all worked out, and I suppose that's not the first time they've seen that kind of thing happen. So I went and I submitted the paperwork, I filled in the forms, and I became a US citizen. And actually that process was a lot easier than getting my driver's license.
That's cool.
They were still skeptical right to the end. They were I don't know why it's hard, but
yeah,
we did it in the end.
Very interesting. I think that's funny how different it is that if your parents are U.S. citizens, then and if they aren't,
yeah,
how different it is. Like whether you have to take the test or whatever, and if they are, then you don't, and it's a lot easier. And I think that's really interesting.
Yes, I think it is. Now, my husband's visa expired, and so he applied for a green card because he's married to me. He's eligible to apply for that because he's now married to a U.S. citizen. But I the visas change all the time. like what visas are available and how many of them are and who's eligible. Like those kind of rules change all the time, and we're kind of fortunate that his work had the lawyers working with us to help us figure out what's the best way to do this. Otherwise, if we had to do it ourselves, it would have been a lot more complicated, and to be honest, I don't really like that kind of paperwork. It probably never would have been done if it was up to me.
Sounds confusing.
Yeah, but in the end, it worked out pretty well. I've heard that recently that the rules changed again. So we're actually very lucky that I'm a US citizen, and going through that process made me realize that it would be good for my kids to become Australian citizens, because now I'm a dual citizen and my children are dual citizens. I had to fill in paperwork to prove to the Australian government that they are eligible. So I went through that process for them. Hopefully, when they get older, that means they have extra options. They can choose to live in the US or they can choose to live in Australia, which is nice to have lots of options.
That's awesome. What exactly is a green card?
That's a great question. It's a card. It's a gateway to citizenship. It's something that, and I think that they last for 10 years. Visas have different rules. Like there's certain rules about whether you can leave the country or how long you're allowed to be in the country and whether or not you're allowed to work and the types of work you're allowed to do. A green card is kind of like an almost citizen. You don't have full citizenship rights, but it's a path. And I think after you've been on a green card for 10 years, you can then apply for citizenship. I'm not 100% on the time, but it's a gateway. It's a path towards getting citizenship.
Okay, that's really cool.
Whereas a visa is granted on the understanding that after it expires, you have to leave the country.
That makes sense. Okay, cool. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to ask you. Is there any other stories that you have?
Trying to think. I remember sitting in the office at the US Embassy. We were in Melbourne, Australia, and we were being interviewed. And I remember it was an unusual experience, unlike anything I've ever been through in my life and probably will ever go through in my life again, because you're sitting there talking to someone who ultimately will decide a huge outcome in your life, like the difference between whether or not you're moving into that country or not. It's a pretty big responsibility, so you feel a little bit of pressure. And the types of questions that they ask you are very probing. They want to get a sense of who you are and what kind of person you are, like whether or not you're going to be a law-abiding citizen, you're going to pay your taxes, you're going to get a job and be a productive member of society, as opposed to, say, start a terrorist cell group, right? They're trying to... I didn't exactly think that at the time, but, it's kind of what they're looking for, and just trying to get a sense of... what kind of person you're going to be and how you're going to fit in with society. So that was a really interesting experience. The next time the next closest interview to that was when my husband was applying for his green card. We had to go to the Department of Immigration in Santa Clara, and in that interview, they wanted to check that we were really married and that it wasn't just one of those, people get married just to get citizenship. So in that interview, we had to take photographs of our wedding, and we had to have letters from people saying that actually we were married.
I have to teach my kitty back there.
Okay, cool. I'll talk to you in a sec.
So in that interview, they're looking at the wedding photos, and we'd been married for 10 years at the time, so it was kind of a brainer. Like, had we been married for 2 weeks,
Yeah.
it would have been like, all right, well, we're gonna have to like really demonstrate here. But for us, I guess it was kind of easy because, you know, we'd been married a long time, and so that was kind of easy. But overall, I'd say it was a pretty easy process.
It's cool. You said they asked like probing questions. Do you remember any of the questions?
Yes, they asked us questions about what we did for a living, and they asked about our income, and they asked, they don't just take your word for it either. They want to see documented evidence that, yes, you've been employed as an engineer, so they want to see your pay stubs from your employers. They even went so far as to ask technical questions, like to make sure that you really are who you say you are, which is funny because for someone working at immigration who doesn't know anything about engineering, hearing them ask questions, it's like kind of funny because their questions, some of them were like, didn't even make too much sense. But so I can imagine there would be a case where someone like got the answer wrong because the question was just a little bit off, but it wasn't too bad. And because we knew what was going on, we kind of just went with it. It was funny though. Yeah, but they really wanted proof. They weren't going to just believe everything that you said. So anytime you made a claim, you had to back it up with like a document or some sort of evidence. So they're very rigorous.
That's cool. It's awesome.
Yeah.
I think that might be it.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else. We did, like I said before, we had the corporate lawyers helping with a lot of the little annoying details, but it was a lot of paperwork.
What was mostly on the paperwork?
Oh, we had to provide addresses of every address we had ever lived at.
Oh, wow.
We had to, like, every country, you had to list every country you'd ever been to. You had to list, they wanted to know, like, any hobbies or clubs that you had or affiliations, like, really in-depth type of stuff.
Sounds very rigorous.
Yeah, it was. It was. And then of course you write it out on paper, and the hard part actually is finding supporting evidence. So you don't didn't even remember half of the addresses that I lived at because some of them I'd only lived for like 6 months, and then they wanted proof that you lived there, so you needed to go and dig up like an old utility bill, but I don't keep that kind of paperwork. Who keeps track of that? So but we got there in the end, and in fact, we didn't have like 100% of the documentation, but I think that they kind of accept that. That like, and maybe it's even a little bit strange if someone is that meticulous in their life that they can produce every single document. Maybe that's a red flag in and of itself.
Yeah. That's super cool. I think that's very interesting that they ask for that much documentation.
Yeah.
And I think that's smart too.
Yeah.
They put that much time and energy in testing that. Sounds a lot like a college application.
Yeah, is it similar?
Yeah. Listing all the clubs and activities you've been in and stuff. Do you like living in Los Gatos?
I do. Yeah, it's beautiful here. There's definitely things that I like about it, and there's things that are hard, but that's true for every country. No matter where you live, there's some things you're going to like, and there's some things that you'd want to change.
What would you change?
I like I like Australia being a smaller country, the healthcare situation, and I feel like there's a lot of social safety nets. So, like health care for everybody is very nice to know that if you don't have a job, you can still go see a doctor. In fact, it seems to me very strange that here in the US, you can't make jobs about your career without thinking about health insurance, and those shouldn't be combined. They're totally separate things. Like your health is your health and your job is your job. And to really be successful in your career, you need to just think about doing your work, not thinking about, well, I'm going to make this compromise and choose this job security because I need health insurance, or like that part's just a bit I don't know, unintuitive to me, and I can't see how anyone ever thought that was a good idea. It just is a bit strange. I like how beautiful it is here, and I like the trees and being close to Santa Cruz, and just like this is a beautiful country with the mountains and Tahoe, Yosemite, and all the national parks, and just such awesome natural beauty that, I mean, it's world class. It's just stunning, and it's also cool that there's like really interesting technology things happening here, and it's pretty upbeat and positive. It does seem, though, that there's a divide in the US between, like, an intellectual divide, which is a bit troubling for the future. And I consider myself incredibly fortunate to be educated and have access to education, and my kids have access to education. But, you know, there's a lot of people who are born without the privilege of having that, and maybe even just based on their ethnicity, their race, and their skin color, things will be a lot harder for them. Whereas that seems to be less of an issue in Australia, and less issues because there's more safety nets for everybody, so health insurance and social security.
That's very interesting. I don't know what made America think that way either. I think that's interesting that we have it so healthcare and stuff so integrated. I think that's confusing to me. It makes growing up a little harder. But yeah.
And education is different in Australia, although I think that the trend is moving to be more about making money. But when I was growing up in Australia, education was free for all Australian citizens. It was expected that everyone would have equal access to education, including university. So people didn't come out of university with these huge debts.
That'd be nice.
At some point, universities needed to get more funding and more money, and they started to privatize more and start charging more and turn it more into a business and less of a social service to educate large groups of people, but more of a money-making enterprise. So now it's kind of moving more in the direction of the US, where you have these private universities who charge phenomenal amounts of money, and it's kind of like designer clothing that, yes, you do have there's an advantage to having that nice designer outfit, but it's not free.
Yeah.
And ultimately you have to choose whether or not you're willing to pay the price of admission, if that's worth it to you. And I think there's definitely cases where it is worth it, for people who want to work in certain careers, like in finance, having an MBA, and having, like, Harvard or Stanford is going to give you access to networking and meeting people, but there's a lot of careers where there really isn't a huge advantage, like in terms of working at big companies as an engineer, like Google, Apple, Facebook. A lot of them don't really care what university you went to. They really just care about what you know, which is a good thing. It's more about whether or not you can solve the problems and whether or not you can help the company. And I think that that's a useful and much better way of doing things.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot that comes on to a brand name, Stanford, Harvard, but it's really a lot of the same information.
Yeah.
And I think that's super interesting.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. If someone offered me a place at one of those universities, I'd take it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I could afford it, I'd take it.
Yeah.
But I also, it would depend on what, it really would depend on like what my ultimate goal was.
Mm-hmm.
Which at this point, I don't know that it would really benefit me too much.
Mm-hmm.
In Australia, going to university is a logistical thing. You just choose, you look on the map and you look at the bus route and you figure out like which one is the closest to you, and you're going to spend the least amount of time commuting because you still live at home with your parents when you study.
Mm-hmm.
That way it's cheaper. You don't have to like have a dorm, and you're not moving out of home.
Yeah.
You still get to live with your parents who provide the food and housing. So, choosing a university in Australia is really a logistical, like, which one's the closest or which one has an interesting course that I feel like studying. And actually, some people, like, mix and match. They'll, like, take some subjects at one university and some at another, and the universities all have, like, exchange programs where, like, you know, you can mix and match your subjects. So that's kind of cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool. Seems a lot, I don't know, easier than it does here, where we have to there's a lot more options, and I like the lot more options, but that seems a lot more simple and easier.
Yeah. Sometimes having in so many options, there's more pressure to make the right choice.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get this feeling like, oh, if I make the wrong choice, I'm making a huge mistake and I have to live with that for the rest of my life. But if you don't have any options and you just get, like, it's just like a really simple A or B, or like which one's closer, it's like, it takes a lot of that pressure away, which is, I mean, at the time I liked it. Having said that, I remember in Australia thinking, wow, it'd be so nice to go to one of these fancy universities like Harvard or Stanford or Berkeley, like, because they have world-class professors and world-class like stuff that they study. But
yeah,
you know, it turned out that my university, even though it was a public university, we had some pretty cool world-class people in my department. For
That's
a short
awesome.
term, like for a short while, for like a year or two, there was like a phase where we had some really cool, influential people.
Mm-hmm.
And then they left and went to Berkeley, and
Yeah.
yeah, no, it was good.
That's awesome. Okay, well, I think that's it, unless there's anything else.
That's all I can think of.
Okay, well, thank you so much for talking to me.
You are
I
very
enjoyed
welcome.
hearing all your stories.
You are very welcome. Happy to help.